I veered into a darker chapter in Fenn's life. Some of that checkered past that so many seem to want me to know about. With the warnings of Sasha and Doug Preston still ringing in my ears, I steeled myself to ask about something I figured would infuriate Fenn, something that might cause him to kick me out right away, something that was part of that whole story Preston had been talking about. The government raid on Fenn's home. In 2009, federal agents for the Bureau of Land Management, accompanied by at least one agent from the FBI, burst into this very house seeking contraband artifacts. It was part of the largest crackdown on Native American artifact tracking in American history, codenamed Operation Cerberus Action, and colloquially known as the Four Corners Raids. Fenn was one of 4 antiques dealers whose homes were raided, in a sting that led to charges against 26 people and eventually 3 suicides. 2 of the men charged, and the FBI's lead informant, just weeks before he was set to testify. Seems like a pretty ugly thing to be caught up in, right? The FBI and the BLM don't just raid people's homes without real reason. Or do they? On the surface, the mere association of Fenn with any sort of raid or crackdown looked bad. But as I studied up on it, I learned that the Four Corners case has become highly controversial, and over the years, it had been generally accepted that Fenn's involvement with any sort of illegal activity in that case was tangential at worst, virtually non-existent at best. Fenn was never charged with the crime, and ultimately, he said, he got the government to admit to some wrongdoing. The Four Corners case was built around the work of one main informant, Ted Gardner, who was paid $224,000 over several years to acquire $350,000 worth of artifacts using government money, according to the Santa Fe New Mexican. But almost since the moment the details of the operation became public, it was widely criticized, both for the methods used and for potentially overstating how big the black market around these artifacts really was. In the end, despite all the arrests and the size of the operation, no one served any jail time, and all charges were settled out of court for probated sentences. I thought bringing this up would anger Fenn, and I treaded lightly, as talking about it seemed certain to infuriate him. Yet Fenn's reaction was not at all what I expected. He loved that I'd brought it up. He was positively crowing while talking about the raids. He saw it as a case where he beat the government at its own game, where he proved that they were the crooks, not him. They accused me of going in a cave in Arizona on government property and taking some things out of it, which was against the law. First of all, it wasn't on government property. Somebody had said something about me, and they bought into it. That they did. And on June 10, 2009, an army of agents from various government agencies descended on Fenn's compound. There were 23 agents of the federal government for 7.5 hours searching my property, Fenn said. It wasn't an FBI raid, though an FBI guy was there. It was BLM. There was game and fish, archaeologists, OSHA even. They didn't find what they were looking for. Not really. But they did find something unexpected. The treasure chest itself. They saw the treasure chest. They photographed it. And the last thing they did before they left was call me into my vault, and they wanted me to acknowledge that the thing was still intact. I said, it appears to be. There were 2 big nuggets. I don't know if anybody stole anything or not. I didn't have the coins counted, but I don't trust anyone. He was still mad at the government over it almost a decade later, feeling like he and his name had been unfairly dragged through the mud for little reason. The search warrant said, look for evidence of anything that would indicate a crime had been committed, Fenn said. Jesus Christ, that's 270-some man-hours they spent searching my house, and they didn't find anything. Well, that's not completely accurate. They did confiscate 4 items, according to the Arizona Republic. One object, a buffalo skull, was sold to an undercover agent, while agents took another buffalo skull, an old basket, and an art object he made himself. But Fenn's larger point stands. Still, though, just where did Fenn get a lot of this stuff, the items he built his collection on? That's where it starts to get a little thornier. Whether or not he did anything illegal in this specific case, it has long been contended that Fenn created his collection doing things that those in the archaeological community would consider improper, or that, at the very least, violate the standards they considered normal today. Fenn's interest in Native American relics dates to his childhood, as he happily details in his books. One of his most prized possessions was the arrowhead he found when he was 9, out walking with his father. Once he joined the Air Force and was stationed in Europe, he spent his free time flying over and then visiting some of the world's most fascinating historic sites. He was kicked out of Pompeii 3 times. He would fly over the Sahara, land, and then search for millennia-old spearheads in the Libyan desert. But the real beginnings of his Native American art collection came in the 1960s, when he was stationed at Arizona's Williams Air Force Base. He would fly over remote Arizona canyons, scanning the ground for possible ruins. Then on weekends, he'd go exploring, sometimes finding caves that he believed had not been visited since the Native Americans themselves lived there. Did he take anything from them? A 2012 Newsweek article says so. The piece, by reporter Tony DeCopel, digs into Fenn's past and finds tales of him and a pair of partners adventuring through the Southwest, heading into caves and old ruined pueblos and cliff dwellings, getting into all kinds of hijinks, expecting the law to come bust them at every turn. One time thinking, for instance, that the sound of a helicopter meant rangers coming to nab them, when it turned out to be Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater instead, out on an expedition of his own. He was a straight-up pot hunter, as they're known, digging for artifacts on the edge of legality, DeCopel said on Twitter years later. DeCopel stops short of explicitly calling Fenn a gravedigger, but says that he interviewed a man who dug with Fenn, and he recalled what the experience of digging back then was like. You can't dig out there without digging up some graves, DeCopel says the man told him. So Fenn and his friends explored and searched and sometimes dug. But only one of the three adventurers, Fenn, thought to make a profession out of their gatherings, and the group eventually broke up. That was partly because, as one of the trio's daughters told DeCopel, Fenn wasn't just taking a treasure or two, but returning to caves and stripping them clean. On Twitter, DeCopel said that's where Fenn got the foundation for his art empire. As one put it to me on the record, he saw something that he could cash in on, and he made his family fortune on it, DeCopel wrote. Fenn completely disavowed the Newsweek article to me, saying it was full of all manner of errors and falsehoods, still furious about it 5 years later. I later obtained the search warrant application justifying the government's raid, which does detail several recorded conversations between Fenn and informant Bill Schenck, wherein Fenn explains how he found many of the items in his collection himself at old Native American sites. In the warrant application, the government alleges that some of these sites were on protected lands. The exact locations and dates of these finds were at the crux of the illegality question. But whether Fenn was acting legally or not, at least some of his early collection was amassed in this fashion, acknowledged his lawyer, Peter Schoenberg. Schoenberg admitted to the Republic that some of Fenn's finds were made in this way, but before protective statutes were passed, barring much of that kind of searching, thus meaning that he did nothing wrong by the laws of the day. Fenn can also be seen making those types of arguments in the search warrant application. For instance, when he says he bought an eagle feather headdress of a type borrowed from sale today, but that he had bought it in 1948, 1 year before the law was passed. He was certainly within the parameters of the law, Schoenberg said. Fenn had also long been in conflict with elements of the southwestern archaeological community because of his ownership and excavation of the San Lazaro Pueblo, a Native American site that many would have preferred to see preserved by historians and archaeologists, not some ex-fighter jock turned art dealer. In the 1980s, Fenn bought San Lazaro, site of a Taino Indian village of thousands of rooms in the Galisteo Basin, occupied from the 12th century until the early days of Spanish rule in New Mexico, and spent decades exploring it and excavating many of its treasures. He was deeply passionate about the site and believed that he was doing a good deed by bringing these items out so they could be seen and enjoyed. I don't violate the rules, Fenn told me. It's that the archaeologists don't like the rules. The law says that a landowner can excavate on his own land without a permit. The archaeologists don't like that. Their argument is that if you don't have a PhD in archaeology, you shouldn't be excavating any place. But many archaeologists contend that Fenn's excavations remove these items from their natural context and thus diminish them and their history. They largely paint a picture of Fenn as cavalier, running roughshod over sites he did not fully understand or appreciate. Yet Fenn wasn't just some lone wolf. When he ran into